Okay, so we're diving into leadership today.
Yeah.
Specifically, like, what really makes a successful leader?
Yeah.
Like, not just the buzzwords.
Uh-huh.
We've got some great material to work with today.
Yeah.
Yeah, excerpts from Ram Charan's audiobook Know-How,
Right.
and some lecture notes, too.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with some of his stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack it all and see what we learn.
Sounds good.
All right, so Charan, he's got this whole know-how concept.
Right. It's all about like the skills, not just the abstract qualities, but the actual practical skills you need to get things done as a leader,
Right.
to really make things happen.
To make an impact.
Yeah.
Okay, so he starts with this thing called positioning.
Right.
It's basically about, like, you as a leader having a crystal clear understanding of your business, like, its unique value. Like, why should a customer choose you over everyone else?
Yeah, that's definitely foundational. But you have to remember, it's not a one-time thing. The successful leaders, they're constantly adapting their positioning, as the world changes.
Right.
Consumer behavior, new technologies, global events, even, all these things.
So it's like you're on a ship, right? And you have to keep correcting course.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be looking ahead and making adjustments along the way.
That's a great analogy. Charan actually uses the story of this hardware store, Hastings Electric,
Okay.
owned by these two brothers, the Aloisio brothers.
I think I remember this.
Yeah, so they were doing really well until a Home Depot opened up nearby, and that completely changed things.
Oh, yeah, that was in the material you sent.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did they just, like, give up?
No, not at all. They actually shifted their focus to more specialized services, things that Home Depot wasn't offering.
Interesting.
They repositioned themselves within that new, competitive landscape.
Right.
And it's a good example of how, like, even small changes in the environment, the external environment, can have a huge impact on a business.
That makes sense.
Mm.
But I imagine some businesses struggle with that kind of adaptation.
Oh, yeah.
Like Blockbuster, for instance.
Right.
For a long time, they were, the place to rent movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, Netflix.
Yeah.
Right.
Blockbuster is a really fascinating case, and they did try different things.
They did.
Yeah, they tried emphasizing, like, retail over rentals.
Okay.
They even launched their own online service to compete with Netflix.
Okay.
But it seemed like they were always reacting to these changes instead of, like, anticipating them.
So they were always behind the curve.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what separated a company like Blockbuster from, let's say, Apple? When they launched the iPod and iTunes,
Right.
I mean, that was a pretty massive repositioning, wasn't it?
It was. And with Apple, it wasn't just about having, like a cool new gadget. They really seemed to understand what consumers wanted,
Right.
what the competition was like, and crucially, like how the business would actually make money.
Okay.
Even visionary leaders, they have to be grounded in those fundamentals.
This is making me think that some leaders maybe get so caught up in, like, the vision that they lose sight of the practical side of things.
Yeah, that definitely comes up.
Does it?
Charan talks about two CEOs. One is Nick, and he was, like, brilliant, charismatic,
Right.
but he just lacked that practical know-how.
Okay.
And then there's Bill, and he really focused on developing those skills. And he actually successfully repositioned 3 different businesses.
So being a, a charismatic visionary,
Right.
It's not enough.
Right.
You need those skills. You need that, like, toolkit to approach these challenges.
Yeah.
And that's what he means by know-how.
Exactly. Like, he highlights, ambition, drive, tenacity, self-confidence even,
Okay.
but also, like, psychological openness.
Okay.
And that appetite for learning. These are all important. They're not just, nice to haves. They're tools that can help you as a leader to navigate really complex situations.
Speaking of complex situations, there's that story about Bob Whitman.
Yeah.
He repositioned Franklin Covey, the personal effectiveness training company.
Right.
Didn't they have to make a pretty big shift?
They did. Whitman realized they needed to, like, move beyond personal effectiveness and start addressing the needs of line managers who wanted, measurable business results.
Right.
And that shift came from him, like, directly engaging with customers. Over 130 visits he did.
Wow.
Just gathering that firsthand information, really understanding those changing dynamics of the market.
So it wasn't just sitting in his office and, like, brainstorming a new strategy.
No.
He was out there talking to people, really getting a feel for what they needed.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway, for any leader to be able to reposition yourself, to reposition your business. You have to stay in touch with what's happening, on the ground.
Yeah, that's a good point. What are you doing to gather that information directly from your customers or whoever is affected by your decisions?
That's a really good question to consider. It sounds like positioning and repositioning, they're like ongoing challenges,
It does.
even when a business is doing well.
Yeah. So what other insights does Charan offer on this?
Well, well, even when things are going really well, leaders can't, afford to get complacent.
Right.
That's where another key skill comes in.
Okay.
Detecting patterns of external change.
Okay, so it's not just about like keeping an eye on your competition.
Right.
It's like having the radar system, scanning the horizon, looking for like, both storms and opportunities. Are we talking like macro level stuff here?
Exactly. You need to have that wide-angle lens to see how even seemingly unrelated events, they can impact your business.
So like how do you even begin to do that?
Well, Jeff Immelt, former CEO of GE, he used to hold these dream sessions.
Screen session.
Yeah, where people from different industries, even GV's customers would spend like days brainstorming and envisioning the world 10 years out.
Wow. So they were actively trying to anticipate the change instead of just, reacting to it after the fact.
Yeah. It sounds intense.
It does, but I can see how valuable that would be to be that prepared.
Absolutely. It's all about being proactive. And one of the things they really focused on in these sessions was the emergence of non-traditional competitors.
Okay.
Companies that kind of come out of left field and just like totally disrupt entire industries.
I like Google.
Exactly. Like Google changed the whole media landscape.
Yeah.
Traditional media companies, they didn't even see it coming.
And that is a perfect example of how technology can reshape an industry. I mean, look at what's happening with like newspapers and magazines.
Right.
Their traditional revenue models, like totally upended because of online advertising.
Yeah.
They're having to find completely new ways to generate revenue. And that often means repositioning themselves.
It does. And if we connect this back to, what we were talking about before about positioning, it's clear, like you can't really have one without the other.
Right.
Detecting these patterns of change, it's vital, but then you have to be willing to adapt. Even when things are going well, those signals are out there.
So you gotta stay vigilant.
Yeah.
It's like being a detective almost.
Yeah.
Like looking for clues and piecing together information to figure out what's coming next.
Yeah.
In fact, the material you sent, there's that story about Ivan Seidenberg.
Oh, yeah.
Former CEO of Verizon.
Right.
He seemed to have like a real knack for this kind of thing.
Seidenberg, he's a great example of this this know-how in action.
Yeah.
He started as a lineman literally climbing telephone poles.
Wow.
But he worked his way up, and along the way, he just like honed that ability to see those patterns of change.
Okay.
One of his biggest moves was investing like billions of dollars in fiber optic cable.
Yeah.
Even though like a lot of people thought it was a huge risk.
He was betting on the future.
He was.
He was anticipating that, demand for speed and bandwidth would continue to grow. And, well, he was right.
He was.
It takes a certain kind of confidence to make a move like that.
It does. But it also goes beyond just like gathering information,
Yeah.
You have to be able to interpret it,
Yeah.
connect the dots. And
Yeah.
to see that bigger picture, you need that mental agility to think critically and to be able to like synthesize information from a lot of different sources.
So it's more than just like reading industry reports and keeping up with the news. It's about filtering all that information, separating the signal from the noise, finding those meaningful patterns. That sounds incredibly challenging.
It can be.
So where do you even begin?
Well, one thing you can do is diversify your information sources. Don't just stick to, industry publications.
Right.
Read widely, even outside your field.
Okay.
Look for articles and books that offer, different, even opposing viewpoints.
So you're trying to challenge your assumptions.
Yeah.
Look at things from like different angles.
Exactly.
I like that. What else can we do to like sharpen those pattern detecting skills?
Well, it's also important to cultivate a network of people who can offer, diverse insights.
Okay.
Talk to people outside your industry.
Right.
Go to conferences, even just like Have coffee with someone who has a different perspective. It's all about expanding your horizons.
Not just absorbing information, but actively like engaging with it.
Yeah.
Finding those connections that others might miss. Okay, I'm getting a much better sense of what it takes to be a leader in today's world. It's not just about, giving orders.
Right.
It's about, what's the word Charan uses?
Know-how.
Know-how.
Yeah, it's about cultivating a specific set of skills that allow you to, navigate this complex and, ever-changing landscape.
Right.
And remember, this is an ongoing process.
Okay.
There's always more to learn and refine.
That's a good reminder. Okay, so we've talked about positioning, repositioning, detecting patterns of change. What other know-hows does Charan cover?
So one of the most crucial know-hows, and it's often overlooked, is judging people.
Judging people.
Yeah, like every leader has to make judgments about people, right?
Sure.
Whether it's hiring, building teams, deciding who to trust.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's a skill that feels almost intuitive, though.
Right.
But, Charan says there's a framework for this. Like, we can actually learn to make better judgment.
He does. He argues that it's not just about, intuition or gut feelings.
Okay.
It's about developing a more structured approach, a set of know-hows, you could say,
Right.
that can help you make, not just more informed decisions, but more objective ones, too.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear more about this. So, like, what are some of those know-hows? What should we be looking for when we're, trying to assess someone, especially for a leadership role?
Well, one of the most important things, and this might sound counterintuitive,
Okay.
is to actually look beyond someone's technical skills and experience.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, those are important, obviously, but what truly sets apart the great leaders is their character, their integrity, their ability to inspire and motivate others.
So you're saying a stellar resume, it's not the whole picture.
Exactly. You have to look deeper. Charan actually tells this story about Nick, the CEO, who couldn't turn around that struggling company.
Right.
He had the skills, he had the charisma, but he made some really critical hiring mistakes.
What did he do?
He brought people in based on, their connections, their impressive resumes, but he didn't really assess their character, like their ability to actually work as part of a team.
It sounded like he was overlooking some pretty essential qualities, things that make someone a good leader, not just a good employee. So are there like specific things we should be paying attention to when we're trying to judge someone's character?
Absolutely. Observation is key.
Okay.
Don't just rely on interviews or resumes,
Right.
Watch how people interact with others, how they handle pressure, how they respond to challenges. Look for those clues that reveal their true character, their integrity, their willingness to collaborate.
So you're looking for those like subtle everyday behaviors, right? The ones that reveal like what someone is really like.
Right.
It's like being a detective again. But this time you're observing human behavior, trying to decipher those patterns.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so observation, what else?
And don't forget about drive and tenacity.
Right.
Are they passionate about what they do? Do they persevere when things get tough?
Yeah.
Those qualities, they're essential for any leader, but especially when you're facing the inevitable challenges, of repositioning or adapting to a changing world.
And it seems like psychological openness would be important in this context too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That ability to be self-aware, to learn from mistakes.
You need to be able to look beyond your own biases, your own preconceived notions of like what a leader should look like. Sometimes the most effective leaders come from, the most unexpected places.
That's true. That makes me think about Bill, the CEO, who'd successfully repositioned those 3 businesses.
Yeah, he was good.
He seemed to have a real knack for judging people. Was that like part of his secret?
It was. Bill understood that leadership wasn't just about checking boxes on a resume. He looked for people with character, with drive, and with those practical, know-hows we've been talking about.
Okay, yeah.
And he was willing to take a chance on people who maybe, other people might have overlooked.
It's so inspiring to think that, like, great leaders can come from anywhere and that, those skills can be cultivated.
Yeah.
That's really at the heart of what Charan is saying, isn't it?
It is.
That leaders are made, not born.
Exactly. It's not about, some innate quality or, magical charisma or something.
Right.
It's about dedication, hard work, and a commitment to developing those essential know-hows.
Yeah.
And it's a journey that's, never truly finished.
There's always more to learn. That's a good reminder for all of us. So this whole deep dive has been so insightful. I mean, we covered so much. We talked about positioning, repositioning, detecting patterns, and now judging people. Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up?
There are a few other know-hows that Charan talks about in the material, but I think the most important thing is that you've started thinking about leadership in this new way.
I have.
It's not about personality or titles. It's about acquiring these specific learnable skills.
Right.
It's about that know-how.
Know-how, yeah. That's a great takeaway. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
Yeah.
So for you listening, what stands out as the most important insight from this deep dive into know-how? What's going to change the way you approach leadership or even just your everyday decision-making? Take some time to reflect on that.
And I'd add, you've been given so many great tools and frameworks from this material.
Yeah.
Keep exploring Charan's work. Think about which of these know-hows you really want to focus on, developing further.
That's a great point. I'm feeling really energized after this conversation. It's so encouraging to know that leadership is something that, we can all learn and grow into.
It absolutely is. And remember, it's not just about climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
It's about becoming more effective, more impactful in whatever you choose to do.
It's a perfect note to end on. Well, that's it for today's deep dive into the world of leadership. We hope you've gained some valuable insights from Ram Charan's know-how and are feeling empowered to cultivate your own leadership skills. Remember, great leadership is within everyone's reach.